There's something amazing about every human being. But what the New Testament says is that there's also another side to this. That certainly in my case, there's stuff in my life which is not so good. There's bad stuff. And what St. Paul says here is all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. He says all have sinned. And speaking for myself, I find that really hard to admit. I just find it really hard ever to admit that I do anything wrong. Whatever happens, I find a way of saying it wasn't my fault. It was somebody else's fault. And I've got an excuse for absolutely everything that happens. Just blame someone else. I came across this. This is an accident claim form. This is an insurance company. People writing to their insurance companies trying to explain why accidents have happened and trying to make excuses for what happened. One man wrote this: "Going home, I drove into the wrong house and collided with a tree that wasn't there." Another man wrote this: "The other car collided with mine without giving warning of his intention." Another man wrote this: "The guy was all over the road. I had to swerve a number of times before I hit him." Another wrote this: "I've been driving my car for 40 years when I fell asleep at the wheel and had an accident." Another wrote this: "The pedestrian had no idea which way to go, so I ran over him." And finally this: "I pulled away from the side of the road, glanced at my mother-in-law and headed over the embankment." But if we're honest, we all do things that we know are wrong. What does it mean to say we sin? Sometimes people say, well, I lead a good life. And again, I'm sure that's right, but the question is, compared to whom? I mean, there's so many different levels. Take anything. Take the area of sport. I told you last week that I love playing squash, and I play a lot of squash. I ought to be far better than I am, but I still regard myself as a good social squash player. And I play very regularly, and there are lots of guys that I play with regularly. But sometimes in the club that I play, people turn up who are not such regular players, and you can usually tell the difference. So one time I was waiting to play a friend of mine, and this guy turned up, and he was about 15 years older than me. He was about 4 stone heavier than me. And he said, "Did I want a game?" So I looked at my watch. I thought, well, there's 5 minutes before my friend comes. Yeah, let's have a game. And I said, "Do you want to warm up?" And he just went like this. No, he said, "That'll do." So we went on court. So I said, you have the serve, because I wanted him to have the opportunity to hit the ball. So so he did the serve, and it kind of went up, and it landed dead in the corner. And I thought, well, it's nice he gets a point. Bit of a fluke. And he went the other side, and then he started this series of lobs, drops, and he had me tearing round that court. I was pouring with sweat. He won 9-love, 9-love, 9-love. I realized why he was 4 stone heavier than me. He never moved. He was just so much better than me. But actually, he's not that good. It's just that, well, if he played a county player, it would be 9-love, 9-love, 9-love the other way. It's just compared to me, he was very good. And it's the same, if you like, in the moral world. I lead a good life compared to whom? John Collins, who was the vicar of this church before Sandy Miller, who was my predecessor, is a wonderful guy. He's now 85 years of age. He is the most godly, humble, gracious, caring, kind person you could ever hope to meet in your entire life. And he's also very good at explaining the Bible. And I remember how he used to explain this verse. Sometimes maybe quite an arrogant young guy would come to him and say, "I've got no need, I lead a good life." So John would say to him, imagine there's a scale here of all the people who have ever lived, from the very best to the very worst. And he'd say to the young guy, who would you put at the very top? And they'd say, well, maybe Mother Teresa, or their mother would go at the top there. And then he'd say, now, who do you think is the worst person who's ever lived? and they would say Stalin or Hitler or their boss would be the worst person who's ever lived. So they'd be down there. And then John would say, and I think you'd agree that all of us are somewhere between there and there. And he'd say, I'm probably somewhere down there, and you're probably somewhere up there. And the man would go, yeah, probably, that's probably the case. Probably the case. And then John would say, now, what do you think the standard is? And the guy would say, well, maybe the standard's the ceiling. And John would turn to this verse and say, the standard's not the ceiling, it's the sky. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And the glory of God was revealed in Jesus Christ. And that's why last week's talk is so sort of foundational to this one. And compared to him, we all fall a long way short. So you might say, well, if that's the case, we're all in the same boat. What does it matter? Well, according to Jesus, it matters for a number of reasons. Because the bad stuff has an impact on our lives, on life. The first, and I've put them under 4 P's just to make it slightly easier to follow. The first one I've called the pollution of sin. Pollution is a massive problem at the moment with our environment. But Jesus is saying, just as we can have pollution in the environment, we can actually pollute our souls. Would you like to turn to Mark chapter 7, page 1020. Mark 7, verse 20. Jesus said this. What comes out of you is what makes you unclean. In other words, what pollutes you. For from within, out of your hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder. And of course, Jesus said anyone who's angry with their brother or sister is on that road. And adultery, Jesus said anyone who looks lustfully is on that road. Greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside, and they make you unclean. Now, looking at that list, you might say, well, I don't do many of those things. But I think the point that Jesus is making is it only takes one to pollute us. It's a bit like make scrambled eggs and you have one bad egg, it's not going to taste very nice. And it's like the Ten Commandments. It's not kind of, you can't kind of say, well, I keep 9 of them. It's just the murder one I find a bit hard to keep. I think it's Bertrand Russell who said he wished the Ten Commandments were more like an exam paper where you might have 10 questions, but you only have to attempt 3 of them. But it's not like that. If you go to court, it's no good saying, well, I've led a really good life. I may have stolen something, but I've done lots of other good things. One offense means that we break the whole law. And Jesus says these things kind of spoil our lives. And then he says, the power of sin. He says that Jesus says anyone who sins is a slave to sin. In other words, it's kind of, he says the bad stuff is very addictive. I thought of a kind of definition of addiction when my son, my eldest son, has a very sweet tooth. I have a sweet tooth, but he has an even sweeter tooth than me. And he often used to come back from work with sort of huge quantities of, I don't know, cake and stuff. One time he came with this box of 16 Krispy Kreme donuts. And I thought, I'm going to try one of those. And I tried one of those, and I felt physically sick. And I said to him, I tried one of those Krispy Kreme donuts, and I felt physically sick. He said, yeah, I know. I always feel a bit ill if I eat one, but I kind of feel that the only way I might feel better is to eat another one.